We were, like many parts in the Caribbean, we were colonized by many different places. For us, it was 7 different entities, the longest and most impactful probably being Denmark, as they were the ones who brought slavery to the region. And then the last for the 100 and plus years has been the United States. Right now I have a few projects going on, but one of them is a solo exhibition that just opened up yesterday in Denmark. It's called For Victor and Alberta, a collection of conjurings and opacities. And it's inside of a building called the Women's Building on a main street in Copenhagen. It's a historic building that was, I think it's several decades old, maybe even 100 years old, possibly. It was built off of a famous exhibition around women. And that same organizer of the exhibition also had another very famous exhibition in which she brought 2 children from the island of St. Croix to display them as human exhibits. Those children were never returned to their families. And it's a kind of a tragic story. So when I was invited to do an exhibition in that space, it was impossible to not deal with that narrative. But it was also a very delicate narrative to deal with. And so it's the piece is thinking, the exhibition in the whole is thinking about how do you hold memory for things that are extremely painful. Also thinking about the politics of display. These children were displayed. So it's in an exhibition space, would I display them again? There were a lot of different types of questions. And we've, in our project, me and Jeannette have had to think about similar types of questions as well, in terms of representation.
Great, thank you so much for that, Vaughn. So over to you, Jeannette.
Yeah, I'm a visual artist. I'm based in Copenhagen. I was born in Denmark. My mother's Danish. My dad is Trinidadian. And I've been to Trinidad many times and I love it. And I miss it. So yeah, so to everyone out there, I miss Trini. I work with different types of media. But right now I have a solo presentation in a shop in Copenhagen, actually just around the corner from where Vaughn is exhibiting. That was a very great coincidence. I was invited by this Danish designer. His name is Mads Nørgaard, and he's very much into art and to integrate art in his commercial space, but not not for the commercial part of it, but to disrupt the commercial space. So he invited me to show my huge sculpture, Where Magic Were Real #2, which is a huge afro sphere in a way. It's like hanging and then spinning slowly around in the window. And then he also invited me to create a new performance in relation to this piece. So I actually created a new performance that was performed not Friday this week, but Friday before. That was on the 8th or something like that. I don't know, maybe the 12th of November. And that was also a performance that was that involved hair. So we were like 5 performers, Black women, who were tied, who had long cornrows, and we were tied. The long cornrows were tied to the house, to the building, and we were like walking back and forth to the sound of the ocean. To kind of mimic that movement. And then we were talking every time some of us came forward, we would say this quote, until the lion has his historian, the hunter will always be a hero, which is an African proverb, and talks about what we're dealing with. I mean, trying to confront who has the right to tell the story. So that's really what my work is about in many ways. So we said it in different languages.
Yeah, thank you.
In Danish and English and Swahili, Portuguese and French. Like trying also to connect to the African diaspora. That's really also one of the main things in my work, I think. But really try to confront the Danish colonial past and present, and try to fill out the gaps
Thank you so much, Jeanette. I think that we're magic, we're real, we're magic. Either way, it works perfectly because it just has all of that meaning. And I did see some snippets of the performance, and it truly is incredible and very, it's very visceral, it's very deep. So thanks again for everything, and that you're doing. It's contributing to truly vital conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's get into our conversation today. Yes, the monument is the memory. So I've been really asking myself questions about, what are these monuments that really still exist in the Caribbean? Do these monuments even do they have an impact on us in some subconscious and even collective way? And then how can we think about monuments that address our past, but also have some impact in the present and definitely for the future? So it was born out of all of these questions, that I really decided to reach out to the both of you because I came across your crowdfunding campaign for the I Am Queen Mary project. And I followed it, every day. And I figured that, wow, what better persons to speak with than you and Vaughn for all of these questions that I had in mind, and especially since this public art piece really does embody and respond to all of these questions in so many ways. So the first question, and again, let's just, it's a very organic conversation. So please feel free to add as many references or, as many personal details as you see fit. So for example, Jeannette and Vaughn, you can add in whenever. Why for each one of you was it necessary to create this monument from a personal perspective?
I can start. We were actually both invited by a Danish researcher called Ehlers to think about a monument. Ehlers, she wanted to create an exhibition during the centennial, which was in 2017, the centennial of the sale of the Virgin Islands to the US from Denmark. So she asked both Vaughn and myself if we could consider making a monument both in Denmark in front of the former West Indian warehouse that was built in the 1700s, and also in front of the warehouse in St. Croix, because those two warehouses back in colonial times, they were tied together, but since Denmark sold the Virgin Islands, they kind of split, of course. So she wanted to reconnect those two locations through art, and she wanted to reconnect our histories. So that is how it actually opened up. And then she had to cancel the exhibition because she couldn't finance it. She couldn't find money for it. But both Vaughn and myself kept working on our projects. And then at some point, we decided to collaborate and to actually merge our projects. And maybe Vaughn want to talk about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The decision I'll be honest, monument making is very polemical, especially in the Caribbean space, because a lot of the monuments are of European colonizers. I know, for example, in Trinidad, you guys have that famous one of Christopher Columbus. It's always very controversial. We have also our very controversial monuments of Danish kings and things like that here. And they, are assertions of power in a particular way, narrative in a particular way. But I think what makes our project really unique is that although it looks like it's commenting on the traditional monuments, but it really is a public art project. It's a very different kind of project in the way that it engages process, narrative, conversation, the public even. And I think even from the conception of the way that we use materials in the work, the way that we've designed the figure in the work. So in the conception of materials, for example, the plinth comes out of, they were first coral stones that were carved out of the ocean by enslaved Africans to form the foundations of most of the colonial era buildings in the Virgin Islands are built that way, where the enslaved people would bring the corals. That is first, and then on top of that comes the Danish brick that was imported. And so a lot of times when we see our colonial towns and we see these buildings, we think Denmark as opposed to considering the labor, and not just labor, but also African knowledge, spiritual traditions. That's all also infused in creating these structures. And I think, so the stones that are a part of the monument came out of ruins of buildings, which is also another interesting point, because of course, when the Danish bricks fall apart and you can expose the ruin, what you see is the true foundation of not just the building, but these societies. And that is what the figure of the monument rests upon. And then the figure is designed by the person that inspires it. It's not a historical monument, it's an allegorical monument, but the person that inspires the work is a woman. She was a real person. Her name is Mary Thomas, and she led the largest labor revolt in Danish colonial history. It was 30 years after slavery, but the conditions hadn't really changed. So it was hundreds of people, including herself, that burnt down a lot of the sugar plantations and a large part of our town of Frederiksted. She emerges as the most popular leaders, and we sing folk songs about her. So she's already quite celebrated in St. Croix, but has been forgotten in Denmark. So, but there's no image of her, no photograph, even though photographs were available during the time she was alive. So we decided to merge our two figures, to do 3D body scans of our figures and merge them to create this new woman that would kind of entitle the piece, I Am Queen Mary, to think about an invitation to asking people, what does it mean to situate ourselves in these histories, literally, physically embody these histories.
Yeah, so Vaughn, let me just interrupt you real quick, but that your explanation just led so beautifully into the second point that I had, that I thought I really wanted to discuss with you, because I did visit your website, which is just such a comprehensive overview of process and inspiration, and it's just so rich in terms of the historical details there as well. And that's when I discovered that, and then I second took and I looked at Queen Mary again, and I realized that, yeah, there is a bit of you and a bit of Jeannette. So
Mm-hmm.
how did that idea come about?
That was her. That was Jeanette's idea, actually.
That was my idea. Yeah, I mean, first of all, this project to begin with was a project that wanted to reconnect our histories between the Atlantic over time and continents and all of that. So in a way, it was quite obvious to also connect our bodies, because, I mean, we carry that history within us also. And we are both visual artists. We both use ourselves in our art. So in that sense, it seems natural at least for many artists to use ourselves as the material. And so it's in this case, it's not really it's not a self-portrait or anything. It's actually, we use ourselves as tools for bringing forth this narrative. So it was kind of, in a way, an easy choice. Of course, also we know that this is very it can be very provocative for people, but it's made with the intention of something that is much bigger than us. It's not about us, it's about all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was much more controversial here in the Virgin Islands to do that, because she is a celebrated heroine. Like I said, we have a highway named after her. We sing folk songs that we learned from childhood growing up. So it was a little almost considered blasphemous for some who use that. But it was, again, I think provocation is a very good word, because it's really questioning, well, if we idolize certain people, if we hold them up as heroines, what are we saying? Are we saying we would like to be like them? And what does that mean to embody them and to be inspired by them and their history? And so it's questioning all that, which is why, for example, we chose to title the work I Am Queen Mary as opposed to a hybrid title of our two projects, because I came into the project much more thinking about the materiality and a series of plinths with the coral stones and the labor of the enslaved Africans. And Jeannette had come in with thinking about this figure that was going to be a counterpoint to the David sculpture that already exists in outside of the warehouse in Copenhagen. And so when we merged it, it was really also a series of very, deep conversation. A lot of this project is also Jeannette and I's relationship and conversations and deep considerations for our two different perspectives at the different sides of the Atlantic and how to negotiate that. The monument is almost an artifact of that as well. Yeah.
And to talk about the figure again, since we come from two different locations and two different backgrounds in a way, it's really important to state that in Copenhagen, 98% of the statues in public space, they represent white males. So, it was so important. I felt that it was so important to have a statement or a manifestation of a Black body in public space here, because there's none, and nobody had thought about it, I think, at that point. So, so now people can, now she's, the sculpture is there, and then suddenly people start to reflect on the lack of Black representation. But before that, nobody even, cared. So that was a very important part from my point of view to really make this statement.
Yeah, or even representation of women, because also the way that we represented her, I think, is quite unique. Because although the pose is a direct quote of the famous Huey P. Newton pose of the leader of the Black Panther Party, where he's sitting with a rifle and a gun, spear, and with the peacock chair. So we're kind of stepping into another Pan-African, Afro-diasporic resistance dialogue by doing that. There aren't a lot of imagery of women in the public space like that. Part of the conversation, again, that came more from Virgin Islanders imaginary, because she's been imaged a lot. There's actually one sculpture on St. Thomas that has 3 of the queens, but most of the images that people, when we think about her, it's like charging. It's a much more dynamic fighting stance. And so to have her seated was quite radical, to be honest, because it was seen as maybe stripping her of her dynamism in a way, making her look more like a European queen. This is not European queendom. This is Afro-Caribbean queendom, which comes out of being a leader, not being a hereditary queen. And so I think the seated position of a rebel queen that is a sugarcane worker, that's barefoot, that's wearing workers' clothes, that has workers' tools, is also quite powerful, because there are, of course, that seated pose is used in many other monuments or images of men in power. But to have a woman like that seated in that way, I think is also quite radical.
Yeah, absolutely. And radical is indeed the term, Vaughn. I want to respond to 2 things that you mentioned. One, I'm a bit, obviously not taken aback, but it's always interesting to hear how a specific artistic decision is received depending on where we come from and from where we're standing. So it's and then secondly, it always inevitably seems as though our countries are our most intense and hardest judges. So it's a bit surprising, but also not surprising that there would be pretty much of that, a lot of that resistance coming from the US Virgin Islands in terms of how Queen Mary should be portrayed and who gets to be that figure and the face of Queen Mary in absence of actual photographs of her. But what I wanted to respond to in that, and I think what I loved about knowing that it was actually this statue of Mary was the fusion of the 2 of you, is that it reminded me of the story of Henrietta Lacks, who is this Afro-American woman, Black American woman, whose genes were just basically exploited by science. I can't, the years are sort of slipping me right now.
I think it's in the 50s or 60s.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And her genes were just exploited, like, just for research, the abundance of research that was done due to her genetic makeup and her DNA. It sort of reminded me of that play and that story where the genetics live on. And, we sort of always tend to forget that we are the physical offspring of every Black woman, of our great grandmothers. And, when you go all the way back in the Caribbean and Africa and anywhere else in the world, we are literally the daughters of these women who've come before us. So for me, it was a very natural choice. But I found it so poetic and so real as an acknowledgement of our infinite connection to our ancestors, all of these amazing women who we're yet to learn about, but with whom, we are connected to, and we will always be as the generations who come after us, there will forever be that connection. And I think this is why I'm just so in love with this decision. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think in some ways it's, when you're thinking about the title of this talk, I mean, we are the monuments. I mean, we are living monuments in the way that you just described it. And so, yeah, it was that, I think that was why it was very important for us to make that essential theme, especially in the titling, because the title is a part of the piece, and not just that it gives an opening, but it's the only text other than the two artists' names that's on the monument. We don't have a monument plaque that lists out who the person is, or because the monument, as we've just described, is about many things. It's not just about Mary Thomas. And but what I always find very interesting is whenever you're near the sculpture, you hear this echoing. People will say, "I am Queen Mary," because they're reading it. And so they're saying it. It becomes like an incantation in a way. And I find that, so there's like a very oral part. I don't think people, when you're walking up to typical monuments, you actually say, but people always say it. They go, "I am Queen Mary, I am Queen Mary, I am Queen." So usually when you're standing there, you hear that being recited quite a bit. And I think it's, that was so much also a part of the piece, to get people to think about what that means to say that, no matter their background. What does that mean to say you embody or connect to the story of a rebel queen from the 19th century?
Yeah, fantastic choice either way. Even the verb to be and the I am, it automatically evokes and conjures that reaction that we are becoming this person, and we become, and we are, and we exist, and as a result, Queen Mary just exists, almost eternally due to this title, and so I think it was Jeannette or you, Vaughn, who mentioned earlier, that obviously in the Caribbean space, and even worldwide, but especially in the Caribbean space, our monuments very much speak to this tragic and painful colonial past. I am wondering, and this lives on as well through our architecture, which is usually very much romanticized as colonial architecture. Our street names, plantations or estates still bear the names of colonial powers and people, who really just did a number of horrible things to this space, but yet still our monuments bear their names. Our physical landscape almost continues to pay tribute to them, in that these people have not been erased. My question for the both of you as well, Jeannette, is, do you think that existing in spaces like this can have some sort of bearing on who we are and how we become who we are within these spaces as Caribbean people?
Do you mean in the Caribbean or in?
Well, for you, it would be in Denmark or in a European space or Westernized space. How does it, do you feel as though the fact that a lot of those monuments exist but do have tragic or painful connotations, and do you see that as potentially impacting the psyche of Afro descendants, Caribbean descendants?
I'm sorry, I'm not too sure I understand your question, but I can answer by saying that to put up a monument of a Black woman in Denmark has actually really created a space for Black people to see ourselves represented in a very, very empowered way. And that has been so, it's been so important, and it's been so, I've been really overwhelmed to see that. Also that people have called us or written emails to us, you know, thanking us for doing it. Like not only people in Denmark, but people from a global perspective, or you know, so that has really made a big impact on me to see how we have created this space. And I can also see how it has really made some people afraid. You know, they're so afraid of this huge Black body there, or this huge Black sculpture. So I think it kind of it evokes a lot of different feelings, but for us and for me, it really has made a huge difference in public space.
Okay.
I don't know if that was kind of a...
Well, it responds.
I think it inverted the question. It was an inverse response, because I think if you would say that our work impacts the psyche of, especially, I mean, it impacts not just the psyche of people of color that are in Denmark and get to see themselves represented. It impacts the psyche of white Danes who have never seen a sculpture of a Black woman in their space that's 2 stories tall, that's imposing, that interrupts everything in their landscape, the harbor, everything. It is an interrupting element. So inversely, we would assume that colonial architecture, celebrations of colonial icons would do the same to people of African descent, of any descent, really, because what it's a statement of power. And I think that is why, for example, in the summer of 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, people around the world were physically attacking sculptures because they realized that they had symbolic violence. That's why that they were matching. That's why they attacked them, because they recognize that they have a symbolic violence embedded in those sculptures. And so, you know, I think what does symbolic violence do in our psyches? I think about that all the time. I live in the Virgin Islands in St. Croix. We were cut up into about 150 sugar plantations. I can't look outside my window and not see a sugar mill. It's impossible. So what does that do to people who have to find a way to live in that? And reconcile that? Is it that you suppress it, you rename it, you reinscribe it with new meaning? I mean, so I think that's also the question of how I am in some ways very much a cultural preservationist. In terms of architecture, I very much believe that we should keep a lot of these, our colonial towns and things like that. But I do really feel, I'm much more about the reinscription of the narrative and how we can retell narratives of those spaces. And shift them. I'm not so much about tearing them down, although I do know people who advocate for taking a lot of these things down. And I understand why they will, for the same symbolic violence. But I would say architecture for me is very different from monuments. I'm a big advocate of taking down a lot of the monuments that are,
Yeah, but I do think you really did highlight or put the spotlight on maybe what I've been trying to make sense of in my mind. And I do think it has a lot to do with the symbolic violence that you exist in a space, in a post-colonial space, but that still pretty much celebrates a colonial past, but in a very unilateral way, in that there is a lack of inclusion, or the story somehow is very heroic, I think. And that in itself, I would like to believe, I mean, I haven't done any extensive research on it, and I guess that is yet to come. Not even from me, but maybe just from a wider academic community. the potential of these physical monuments and the impact of physical space on your own psychological development and how we are and who we permit ourselves to be, even within our space. I think maybe it could be, very important grounds to explore. Jeannette, is there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I just have one last question, because I didn't want to, have an extremely long conversation. I'm interested in how special could monuments be for the future, and well, I guess for the present first, and for the future, and maybe what would either of you say is needed for greater I think greater and more inspiring monuments globally?
Well, both of us have actually been invited to think through monuments in different cities and parts of the world since our project. And I think each circumstance is quite unique to the community, because it is really responding to a space and a community. I think our monuments, they are the ones, I say monuments because we're also planning on erecting a version in the Virgin Islands, but it's extremely site specific. But I think that the potential is what I think Jeannette and I have learned from our project, that they do have the ability to change narratives. And who are we but who we say we are? So much of who we are is who we say we are. The past is what we say the past is. So we have actually the possibility to change the past, which means we have the possibility to change who we are now. And that means, of course, then we have the possibility to change who we will be. So I think that, and monuments do have the ability to shift that and change that possibility, that conversation. Maybe not just monuments, but I think the public art component, because I think it's one thing to just put a sculpture up in a place, but the kind of engagement that Jeannette and I did is much more involved and complex than that. And that kind of engagement does change things. I think it's probably one of for me, the proudest moments of my career, to realize that capacity, because as a visual artist, a lot of times you're always told that your work is for rich people or for museum spaces, or it doesn't have relevance in the world. And this project, I think really, it definitely taught me that, you can make work that has real relevance and, can transform things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I don't really know what to say, because you said everything there, but
but for example, Jeannette, your public art work and your you work with different media, and notably performance is a huge aspect of your public work in terms of public artwork and the installation, and the fact, as Vaughn said, that it is constantly creating dialogue and engagement with those who witness the pieces. So for example, how special is the performance as public art for you, and the potential of that?
Performance is, live performance with a live audience is very powerful, I think, because you have a direct contact with people. And normally I don't really speak with people during a performance, but you're there, you feel the presence and the spirit and everything. So it's a very powerful, powerful media to use performance, I think. And also, performance is also some kind of monument, and maybe the next monument we should make or should be a performance or something like that. I don't know. But
in many ways, our monument is a performance, because we are reenacting the Huey P. Newton pose. We are reenacting, stepping into the legacy of this woman. There's multiple reenactments happening in our work. Yeah,
sure.
Performance.
Definitely. Yeah.
And then the reenactment of inviting people to do the same. So it's like multiple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And almost, multiple and cyclical in the fact that it really does, the fact that you are there to witness a performance, it inevitably has an impact on you, and you sort of just reverberate outwards, I think, whether it's us having conversations about public art, having conversations about public performance as, as equally important and, embedded in public art, because, that's still a conversation that in certain, for example, I can speak for the Caribbean, we're still learning about the different types of ways that public art exists and can have valuable impact. So, I mean, I just really want to thank you, both of you, Vaughn and Jeannette, for, I think, a really exciting and refreshing conversation. And I invite everyone who is having a look at us today, please continue to discover the work of Jeannette Ehlers and Vaughn Belle. I mean, their work is really touching us at a very different level. And I think, please look them up and continue to see what they've been up to and what they're inspiring us to think about. And thank you for following Hot Sun Caribbean Contemporary Art and being a part of our community. We're on all the socials, we're on IG and Facebook, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.